What's going on, guys? Welcome to In the Zone. I'm your host, Garrison Roy, and today we're going to go on a little bit of a rant. And if you're new to the podcast, we have several different segments. We're going to different zones, right? We have uh, today's episode discussing hot topics or calling out some BS overall in the industry, or just things that come to my mind, right? Then we have the full-length interviews. Those are with experts or athletes, coaches, anyone to help you get in the zone or talking about their zone of helping players and coaches themselves. Then you have the mental minutes, or those quick mental game hacks to help elevate your performance. And then also deep dives. Those are the educational explorations into the small intricacies of the game. Maybe it's diving into a research study, or maybe just getting a little bit more specific on what actually works. But today, we are going to kind of redo, but not necessarily redo, just expand a little bit on one that I've done before, which is calling Measure What Matters Part 2, right? So to get right into it, right, you see a lot of training facilities and things like that. Obviously, they're measuring velocity, and that's like a big indicator of guys improving, and I think that's awesome. I'm also one of those, right? Like that's a main KPI, or what people say KPI is a key performance indicator, things that you're looking to measure as them improving, right? Obviously, velocity could be one of those, command could be one of those, right? Or stuff movement for velocity. But I think if you gravitate towards too much on one side or to one particular KPI, let's say velocity, for example, and you forget, hey, there's actually some other pieces to this. There's having velocity with command, right? Like that's kind of a thing that was really just argued against a lot of the quote unquote velocity facilities or training facilities, because that's all they were sold out on, and they forgot some of the other pieces, like can you command your fastball, your off speed, right? Things like that. And again, we've developed and evolved a lot since then as a industry or baseball development training as a whole. However, there are some other things that people can kind of get in a little bit of a hole in, and one of those being like, hey, what's their vertical, what's their 60 time? Or some of these younger kids are like, oh, what's your PG points, bro? Like, come on, some of those things just don't matter at the end of the day, right? Maybe you could say like, hey, what's your championships or things like that. If that's just your overall goal to grow as a team, and that's a team goal for you, is to win X amount of games, or go to the College World Series that's going on right now. Like, I totally am with you on that. Yes, that is a very useful thing to measure and go towards, right? And I'm not saying that you should never measure these things, like your vertical jump or shot put would be another one of those, right? Or just some other indicators. I think some of the other ones would be, maybe how hard you're throwing a plyo ball. Again, kind of situational dependent. I don't think that that puts as much weight if you're spending a lot of your time focusing on that one thing, or focusing on, hey, I got to just get my vertical up and then my velocity will get better. You're kind of missing the boat here, right? And one of my previous guests, Scott Emerson, he's obviously the big league pitching coach for the Oakland Athletics, or soon to be Vegas Athletics, if you want to put it in that realm. But he said something that was very, very indicative to me, which is, hey, we need useful velocity. We need useful pitches. We need useful things that is going to add up into context of the game, right? Another example of that is the 60 time, right? At what point do guys run for a full-on 7 seconds, other than but they're turning, right? If people can argue and say, oh, hey, running around the bases inside the park home run, that's about the same time, maybe a little bit longer. It could be like 10 to 15 seconds, give or take how fast the guy is. I'm like, sure. How frequently does that happen, though? And the 60, last I checked when it was measured, is in a straight line, right? So again, I understand they're trying to measure top end speed and so on and so forth. Maybe this is just where I stand out. I'd rather have a 10 and 20 yard split, see how they're accelerating versus, how quickly they're going from that acceleration towards that top speed, and kind of give a little bit more holistic picture of like, okay, hey, they're starting here, they have a poor acceleration, but they make up for it in the long run. Or maybe they have really good acceleration and they just run out of gas later on too. All really valuable information that can help kind of tailor and tinker what they need for training, right? And finding out what actually matters. Another example would be like, hey, I'm really good at bullpens. And I think I've talked about this also on Fearless Sports Performance podcast. But hey, like, at what point do you just go through and be like, hey, I'm going to hit 10 fastballs in a row? Boom, 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 boom. If you did 10 fastballs in a row in a game, you're probably going to get shelled unless you're just pumping 95 and the guys aren't touching you, right? Like, again, context specific here, but odds are you throwing 10 fastballs in a row is very, very small. So you probably shouldn't practice that, right? There's just a lot of other things on how you can kind of spiral this out, but make sure that you're measuring what matters in your training and your practice, making sure that it's lining up to being as game-like as possible, or adding in slices to the game. A good one would be, hey, and I've done this a lot for some of my guys that I've coached over the past couple of years. We're going to run sprints, right? We're going to add in a slice of the game here. We're going to go, and not just me blowing a whistle or saying go or on your own. I'm going to be standing there acting like I'm pitching. And you're going to go either on my first move or, maybe, do a secondary and then take off. But that's also how you can get some sprint work in and adding in a piece of how it can relate to the actual game. Because you don't want guys to be choking whenever they get into a game-like situation. Like, oh, I got to sprint, but I got to wait for this guy to move. And you've never practiced that before. That can be challenging where guys freeze, right? Or even on the flip side of that, let's say a pitcher is so used to just going, hey, pitch, 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 pitch. And he never varies his looks, or he's never having a runner on to even go and pick off to, and then go back and try to execute a pitch, right? I think that's very valuable, especially when you're transitioning from off season to preseason to end season. You need to have that sliver of time to where you're actually adding in some of these pieces of the game, getting them used to having more quote unquote aliveness, right? You're having that runner or you're having a live batter, right? And I think we've gotten a lot better at that with the live ABs, but now just kind of seeing baseball as a whole, like holding on runners has been atrocious. And I think if you, as a player, right, if you practice that alone, that will set you apart. And as a coach, if you spend a lot of your practice time on that, and again, not just the slow PFPs, halfway doing it, like full on intent, let's, get after it. We got guys running around taking this very seriously. That's going to set you apart and help you even manufacture, outs, or on the flip side, for running or base running, right? You could manufacture runs that way. If you know that everyone else sucks at holding on runners, take advantage of that. Get some free bags, right? Like, make it happen. But that's essentially it for this rant. I'm sure there's a bunch of different ways and directions we could go, but what do you guys think matters as far as measurement goes, right? Like, I'm sure I've heard some people say, oh, hey, yeah, but what about the 90-mile-an-hour formula or whatever? Let's hear your thoughts. What do you got? Shoot them to me. And love to keep this conversation going and stay in the zone.